Right, now we're going to go to my first guest. As I told you before, this is John Bell. John Bell is from a company called Curved Thinking. Good evening, John.
Good evening.
Oh, welcome to TRE. Nice to talk to you.
And to you.
Now I'm looking at the screen and I see you're down in East Sussex.
We are indeed, yes. It's a beautiful day here, but it's not going to last much longer, I don't think.
So I see. According to the weather, you've got a lot of rain coming, haven't you?
Yeah, more to add to all that we've been having in the last few weeks. It's been a miserable summer so far.
Yes, and we'll get rid of the hosepipe ban soon, won't we?
We live in hope.
You know, I was thinking last week, we were doing something on the show here, and I was thinking, you know what, this was a ruse. There's no question about it. They wanted to just make absolutely certain that there was enough water there for the Olympics, because they didn't want to embarrass themselves in front of foreigners.
You could well have a point there.
Yeah, I think that's the only reason they said there's a hosepipe ban. They were making sure that everything was fully topped up. They're trying to cover all the bases, I think. Yeah, never mind the people who live there and pay their council tax, huh?
We're lucky enough to have a well, actually. So
Are you? Oh, good for you. I actually love East Sussex. I have to tell you, I'm a big fan of East Sussex. I've got friends all the way along the coast of Sussex, from Bognor through to Eastbourne, and yeah, it's a brilliant area.
Yeah, we're very happy here.
I'm sure you are. Now then, John, can you tell us a little bit about Curved Thinking before we go any further?
Yes, certainly. Curved Thinking's a small research and consulting firm founded by my wife about 15 years ago now. We do a lot of work for clients in all sorts of different sectors, but in recent times we've been mainly working for government and public sector clients, really trying to help them to get done the jobs they need to do. So, you know, governments, people, whoever it is with the money to spend, the ideas to try and get things done, we help them try and actually make it work in practice, which is where the tough bit comes in, really.
Okay, so I wasn't far off when I was introducing you earlier as calling you a troubleshooting company.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, you could say it's that. We try to understand what the situation is, but more importantly, what you can do about it.
Yes. So you don't just solve the problem. You determine the problem first and then try and solve it.
That's part of the package.
Yes.
Yeah.
So some people might not even realise there is a problem, and you find the problem and then say, "Okay, we've found a problem. Now here's how you go about getting rid of it." That sounds like a pretty good way. Yeah. Sounds like a good way of developing business to me.
We certainly try to. I mean, just to be very clear, we don't come up with all the ideas ourselves, really. A lot of the time what we're trying to do is to find out what the most effective practice is from all over the place. You know, there's loads of really good ideas, people working very well out there, but they don't always have the opportunity to share their experience and learn from each other, and we try and do that as much as possible.
Yes. Okay, well, your website, just before we get started, some people like to click on the website while they're actually listening, so it's www.curvedthinking.com. I have it open.
That's right.
I have it open to my left as we speak. That's not you scratching your head on there. It's somebody scratching their head, maybe a little puzzled on there.
No, that's not me.
That's someone you're just about to help, I'm sure.
That's probably one of our puzzled clients.
Absolutely, yes. Okay. So what I thought I'd do, just for a bit of fun here, is say, okay, you're the troubleshooter. I'm going to fire a few sort of questions at you regarding the problems we have across the world at the moment, and see if you can give me some sensible answers. So I'm going to start, obviously, with the economic situation. I mean, it's pretty accepted that we've got some pretty serious problems everywhere we look. It seems as though we can't create growth and have austerity measures at the same time. If that problem was put to you, John, where would you start with that?
Yeah, I think that's a false dichotomy, to be honest. I mean, it's very clear that we do need to have austerity. You know, there is simply not enough resource around to do all the things that we used to. But I think at the same time, we've really got to be looking at investing in the long-term future, where things really might come from. There is money around. We're creating billions and billions of euros at the moment out of thin air, it would seem, and that's for propping up the finance sector. Why can't we use some of that to start investing in the things we know we're going to need, whether it's low-carbon technologies or rebuilding all the bridges that are falling down and crumbling all over the place, or putting in high-speed rail, getting broadband upgraded. There's loads of things that we're going to need to do in the future. I would say let's look at trying to invest in some of those. And that sort of investment is a real investment because it brings potential returns into the future. If you go to the capital markets and say, invest in building a railway, that will have revenues attached to it in the future. Why not build those things now? That creates jobs, it gets the economy moving. You've got to have a principle that says it's better to have people working on something than sitting around idle. That's one of the ways you can mobilise things and trying to get things going forward. Look at what needs to get done. Let's bring it forward and do it now.
You know, I think that's pure, utter common sense that most people in the street would totally agree with you. When it gets a little bit, when you get a bit deeper, you realise that the money isn't actually sitting. We all like to blame the government, but the money isn't sitting in the Treasury waiting to be spent. It's out there in a lot of private sector banks, etc., who are topping up the reserves that they used in the bad times, and they're not going to start lending again until they're right topped back up again and they're ready to do it. So how do we provoke those people to spend money on things that are not going to be profitable for them?
Well, the sort of things I'm talking about have a very good prospect of being profitable. I mean, if the government is standing behind something like a major infrastructure project, then you can be fairly sure, well, at least until recent times in most parts of the world, you can be fairly sure that government's going to pay its bills. And actually across Europe, the great majority of governments are still liquid and still able to stand behind their currencies. That's certainly the case in Britain. But there's also other vehicles like the European Investment Bank. I mean, it's an EU institution. It has money. It has all of the EU governments standing behind it. That already invests in these sorts of things. Why not put some of the resource into that and put it alongside what the commercial sector has to offer?
These billions that you say we're making, I mean, these banks are not sitting there leaving it doing nothing. They've got it out working and making interest. Where do you think they're putting it?
I think they're sitting on a lot of it at the moment.
Really?
And I think that's in part because they will tell you that the demand isn't there, that there are businesses out there that are too afraid to invest. So if you're a business, you're not sure what the economic climate is going to do. You're scared about investing in new plant, new machinery at the moment because you're not sure whether you're going to be able to pay for it in the long run. But if you're a big construction company and you know you're going to have a 20-year contract to build high-speed rail in the UK, then that's a pretty certain investment that's going to happen. Then that would give you the confidence to start buying the sort of stuff you're going to need to make that happen.
Okay, that seems a sensible idea. What about the, I was thinking about technology while we were thinking about, while we were talking about this, getting the country back to work. And I was looking back. I've done an interview which is going to go out later, talking about how we've evolved in the last 50 years, especially with the advent of obviously the computer and the chip, etc. Is it proving to be actually damaging to countries like the UK? I mean, we used to have factories and make things, etc. It seems as though now we're putting every time we make a machine, it puts more people out of work, and now there's just no industrial or production work for anybody anymore. We can't all work in McDonald's and a sports shop, can we?
No, but some of us do, and very, very good quality jobs they are too. McDonald's has one of the best training programs around, but we'll put that to one side. I think if you go back into history, the evidence is that technology actually benefits everybody in the long run, but it reshapes things. So it brings change with it, and inevitably, if you mechanise a factory, then some people will lose their jobs. But do we really want to keep some of those jobs? If you look at some of the industries that perhaps have gone through some of the most mechanisation, take coal mining or steel production, for example, big old dirty jobs, and people romanticise them. I don't really think that we want people down coal mines still risking their lives or standing next to huge blast furnaces having a really terrible time. The way the coal mining and steel works in the UK and across Europe now is a much higher tech thing. It's producing stuff at very good value, actually. It's still employing people, is creating further work in making the machines to create all that sort of stuff. And you can put that in contrast with the poor blighters in China that are still having to work in the old-fashioned way. You set those two jobs alongside each other, you'd have to say that it's better to be doing it in a mechanised way than using lots of labour. The important thing you've got to do, though, really is be looking at where are the new jobs going to be coming from. So if the labour market is shifting, if technology is making shifts and you don't need so many people, where can you pick them up? Go back to some of the things I was talking about earlier. There's plenty of things out there that can be done that can give people jobs at all sorts of different levels. I'll give you an example on that. Across Europe, the housing stock is in pretty poor condition. If we were to put a major effort in place to try and upgrade the housing stock, make it consume less energy, make it warmer in the winter, cooler in the summer, sort out all those leaking windows, you could be creating millions of jobs over the next few years just doing that.
You see, I mean, I go back to our very first question. I agree with you completely. I think the man in the street would probably agree with you, but this comes down to the logistics of who's going to do it, who's going to take the responsibility to, for example, begin a company. I mean, are you suggesting this should be a government initiative? And if so, where's the money going to come from, given that the government are saying that they don't have it? They're struggling to put money into education and health. They're not going to be, starting these kind of initiatives. So who should fund this? Where should it start?
Well, the clever way of funding that is to look at it as a long-term investment. If you were to improve the housing stock in the way that I've suggested, that's going to save you money on your energy bills in the long term. We all know that energy prices are going through the roof at the moment. If you do something that has the potential for very long-term savings, then actually you can borrow against that. That's just an example of how you can sort of try and look at it. But you have to take each case on its merits. The point I'm trying to make really is that there's lots of stuff out there that needs to get done. Bring some clever economics to bear upon it and take a long-term perspective rather than a short-term perspective, and you should be able to make the money stack up.
Well, I tell you what, this is just, we'll move on after this, but this is just my theory on this, okay? I just think that all the while we've got a government that needs to be re-elected every 4 or 5 years, it's never going to happen, because you're talking about long-term things, and nobody's going to make decisions and use up money they can use, which will be, which will buy them votes, which will go down well with the public, into things that the public can't see the results of and won't see the results for 10 or 20 years. So if you said to a government now, here you go, you've got the next 20 years, no one's going to contest you, get on with it, do the best you can, maybe they might start thinking about it, but that's not going to happen. So all the while they need to buy votes and they need to do things that make them popular, I can't see it ever happening, can you?
I can see it happening if you create a vision that says to people, look, this is something that is really worth doing, and try and mobilise the country behind it. I mean, go back to one of the examples I was using earlier on, High Speed 1, which is the, for people listening who don't know what that is, it's the potential to build a new high-speed line between London and the north, something that the country desperately needs. It's a contested issue, but my view would be it's something that we would really need to compete in the long term.
It was actually brought up in Prime Minister's Question Time today, in fact, yes.
Was it indeed?
Yes.
Yeah, I was elsewhere occupied today, unfortunately. I didn't hear that, but that's very timely. The thing about that is you've got to take a decision and get it done. Once you've embarked on something like that, it'd be very difficult to turn it around. If you get the right pieces in place, if you get the sort of political consensus behind it, because actually most of the big parties are in favour of that as something to get done, then it should happen. And I think it's the sort of thing that people will really get behind if they actually see bricks and mortar on the ground and things happening. Go to London at the moment, Crossrail, again, a big infrastructure project, exactly the sort of thing that I'm talking about that we need more of. It has a good level of political consensus underpinning it, and the things that actually get in the way of that is it's very complicated digging up bits of London because there's so much archaeology underneath there, but that's a different story.
Yes. Again, though, these are things that won't show fruit for a while, and I just think, you have more faith than me that the public's accepting, listen, trust us, this is going to be good for you in the long run. I think people want things and they want it now. Just to finish off on this particular question, one of the questions that I had for a historian who I'm going to be speaking to later is why Winston Churchill lost his seat after the war, having done a job that everybody thought of him as the hero, and he went to the country assuming that he would get in, and it was one of the biggest losses he's ever perceived. And when I asked my historian why he thought that was, he said the country wanted better. They wanted things, and they wanted it now. They didn't want austerity. They'd won the war. They wanted better. And he was selling them how difficult it was going to be for the next 10 years, and they weren't buying it. And he was right.
I would concur with that historian's view, yeah. I mean, the better that they wanted was actually to do with, in many ways, to the creation of the welfare state and the National Health Service. That was the vision that the Labour Party at that point was putting in front of people. Better, not just than better in the war, than better than what people had in the 30s, the level of insecurity that was around then. Now, if you look at both of those things, the health service and better welfare, neither of those things were necessarily costing large amounts more money. It was a different way of organising the things that needed to get done.
Right. Okay. Let's assume the public are bright, intelligent people, and they're going to accept a lower standard of living for the future of their kids and I'd love that to be true. I just don't think it is. Go on. Sorry. Sorry.
No. Just to make the point, really. I mean, people are already seeing their standard of living being squeezed.
Yes.
But people are coping with that. Will they see improvement? I think if you see the sorts of things that I'm talking about, it will create work. If you create large amounts of investment, it will create work. People will see that happening.
Yes.
That will turn into jobs. That will turn into people paying taxes. That hopefully turns into the sort of things that the revenues that the government needs to be able to spend on what it needs to do.
Yes, it's only like a merry-go-round. It just needs to be kick-started, isn't it? I mean, it's all about confidence. Once people have got some money in their pocket, they can spend it. That employs other people to take the money from them and use it and pay tax as well. It's just one big merry-go-round.
Yes.
Yeah. This standard of living, you were just talking about the fact that it's already being squeezed considerably. I mean, I think I was surprised at how long this has gone on, and I didn't think, like everybody else a few years ago, we were saying, it's going to be another year of this, and here we are some years later beginning to see no end to it. Do you think we're going to go back to a time, do you think we have to settle down to a time where some of the things that we accept as normal now aren't going to be normal again? The level of it, I mean, the cars, the Sky TV, the holidays, things that have become normal that weren't normal when I was a kid. Do you think we have to accept that now?
Possibly up to an extent. I mean, I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that there's an awful lot of people out there for whom those things really aren't normal at the moment, either never have been or they've relatively recently lost them. There's an interesting piece in The Guardian yesterday. They've done a new piece of research identifying up to 7 million families, or 7 million people living in families that are just one unexpected bill away from financial disaster. And these aren't the people on benefits. They're having a tough enough time as it is. These are the working poor. There's a lot of people out there that are having a pretty tough time now. And I think we have to be careful of not giving an impression to those folk that they're never going to be able to make progress and actually get to the kind of standard of living that those of us that are lucky enough to have managed to reach. So I think it's important to keep in mind people do need to have hope, and humanity progresses by people actually getting progressively slightly better.
Yes.
However, if you're talking about people living beyond their means, actually really what's fueled that is cheap credit. And I think we've got to get used to the idea that when we want something, we're going to have to afford it in real terms rather than just borrowing the money to do it. And that might be kit and gizmos in cars, or even more, it might be property. I mean, you guys in Spain have had a particular problem with a property bubble, haven't you? Even more so here than in the UK.
Yes.
That comes from cheap credit. The days of cheap credit have to have come to an end, I think, and people have got to wait. But I think you can have aspirations. I think you can still have those holidays. You can still have that kit. But maybe you're going to need to wait a little bit longer and save up for it.
You see, once again, we get to that point that who's responsible for cheap credit? There's an argument both ways. We often hear it on this station. People say, well, they shouldn't be offering them that sort of credit if they can't afford to pay for it. And then somebody else will say, hang on a second, you're in charge of your own finances. If you don't want it, don't take it. So, who's to blame?
I think in that case that the blame lies with the clever financiers who haven't really been in the habit of working out whether people really can pay back.
Yes.
That's where the real blame lies in my view.
Yes. Do you think there's any argument that countries, say like Britain, for example, should put their people first and make sure contracts and work go to their country? Is that fair? You're a corporation person. You deal with corporations all the time. Is that a reasonable thing to ask, or is that limiting competitiveness?
I think protectionism is a very bad idea, because as soon as you do that, then all your trading partners are going to do exactly the same thing back to you. Protectionism really is a form of economic warfare between countries, and that's really not what we need at the moment. It leads to the kind of nationalism which is, it's a spectre across Europe, and we've got to do everything we can to try and avoid it. I think, to use a phrase that others have used in other circumstances, actually Europe really is all in this together. And if you look at the way the EU has developed over years, it might have an awful lot of issues and needs some reform in many areas, but the single market has done a fantastic job of creating wealth and creating jobs over time, and I really think it would be a big mistake to move away from that. I think what you do have to do as a country is to look at what you're good at and treat that as an exportable thing as well as something that you do internally, and that's the way to really compete, is not to try and pull up the drawbridges, because otherwise everybody will do the same thing, and that won't help anybody in the long run.
Yes, I see what you're saying, and I would like to clarify what I was thinking. I wasn't just thinking we should just keep our jobs in-house and that's it. So just to clarify my thinking, if it was insistent that they were price competitive, here's my point. If I want to go downstairs from this studio and go and buy something in a shop downstairs, and it's only going to cost me £1, but I know that it's 80 pence, in Estepona, which is, 10 miles away, but I've got to get in the car and drive there and use petrol, etc. So my point being, sometimes things aren't necessarily cheaper. We've seen contracts going recently to France, we've seen government contracts going to France, etc. If you took off the social cost of it, the amount of people who then be out of work, and the social security and benefits payments that are going to have to go to those people, let alone the decline in living standards and morale, surely there should be a cost to that weighed in, and maybe they might find it was better off to leave the contracts here.
Yeah, I mean, if that was genuinely the case, I mean, to my mind, there are ways for government procurement to do exactly that. In fact, it's something there's been quite a lot of attention being paid to in the UK recently, that you put your contract out and you put your conditions in it. You can include within that things like, we expect you to employ a certain amount of local labour, we expect you to achieve certain environmental benefits, we expect you to invest in the local community in certain ways. You put that out and then you wait for people to come back and give you your offer. So to an extent, it may not be so much to do with who owns the company as to what they're offering you in terms of what you want to buy. And I think certainly public authorities can be a lot more assertive in using the European legislation to acquire not just the best price, but to achieve a wider set of benefits. And that's something that's actually beginning to take off now.
Yes, I think sometimes the problem is that these are contracted out from the government to private companies who don't have any interest in the employing British people. They don't really care. The bottom line is finance, profit, and that's their main thing. I think the government should have more say, and they should control a bit more where these contracts go when they are the person that's actually issuing the contract in the first place. Yeah,
as I said, my point is that governments are beginning to specify that in contracts.
Yes.
One of the things I do as part of this job is a website called ESF-Works.com. It promotes the European Social Fund, which is one of the big European structural funds in the UK. If you look on there, there's plenty of examples of just what I'm talking about here.
Okay. Let's go on to the finance and see what you can do for us at Curved Thinking with regard to the economy. We've had Ireland and Greece had bailouts. We've got a lot going on today. Coalition government put together in Greece. They're going to want to renegotiate some of the terms, apparently. Spain is taking a massive loan. Let's call it, we've got it a loan, by the way. We're not bailed out. We've had a loan. Yeah, we've borrowed a few quid from Europe, but it's not a bailout, it's a loan. Anyway, what I was going to ask you is do you think, I mean, from us here, it looks as though it's sinking and we're just watching it. Do you see the collapse of the euro as inevitable?
I don't think it's inevitable. I mean, it has to be one of the potential outcomes of this, but I really don't think you can ever underestimate the amount of political will that was underneath the euro when it was first founded. Actually, one of the sadnesses of the euro was that the political will was really in advance of the amount of unifying of decision-making and finances and economies that you really need to make a single currency work. So, no, I don't think it's inevitable, because I think that political will to make it work, it may not look like it at the moment, but I think it's still quite strong underpinning it. But it might collapse. Nobody really knows. That's the problem. If you get anybody who says they know for certain what's going to happen, then they're lying to you, because nobody knows what's going to happen at the moment.
No, it does look as though a lot of people are flailing around at the moment, doesn't it?
I think they are, and a lot of those people are exactly the same ones who failed to predict the mess that we were going to get into in the first place. So the extent to which they're worth listening to has to be open to question. I think we should keep in mind, I mean, the euro's problems are to do with the contradictions inherent in it at the moment, that the economies are not sufficiently merged to be able to cope with the way things are when times get rough. But why did times get rough? That's not to do with the euro, that's to do with the way that the finance system was financed by cheap credit, as we were talking about earlier, and really made a whole series of really serious fundamental mistakes in the pursuits of profit, particularly in North America and certain parts of Europe.
Absolutely, subprime lending, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where it started.
I don't see...
Barroso is right on that.
I don't see enough regulation being put in to stop that happening again and again.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think there is a major issue that the finance industry has actually come through this pretty much unscathed. There's a lot of people who lost their jobs within it, but the really high flyers, the really big companies, the ones that have been shored up, they've come through it pretty well, and I think there are still a lot of questions to be answered about how they're going to be prevented from doing this sort of thing again.
Well, you know what, that brings me beautifully to my next question, which is basically that I know there are people who are listening here because we talk to them and they phone in, that believe we're being manipulated, basically, in the world. I'm not just talking about in a country, I mean in the world, by a relatively small group of kind of, what can we call them, wealthy despots. I don't doubt the existence of such a group. I really don't. That's not my doubt. We have this conversation back and forth. They're trying to convert me, and they're getting there slowly but surely, I think. But surely their fortunes and their wealth would depend on there being success and growth in the world, wouldn't they? I mean, surely they'd get no benefit from euro collapsing and the austerity that we've got.
Well, if only that was true. I mean, I'm not sure about the despots. I don't think there's a load of guys in hollowed-out mountains stroking white cats who are behind all this. I think a better analogy is an anthill that's got out of control, actually. I think the finance system is made up of loads and loads and loads of people doing their own things, but to a collective end that's actually beginning to damage the environment that it exists in. It's an anthill, it's not despots. But you can't underestimate the ability of the finance system to manipulate what's going on to its own advantage. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of a practice called shorting shares, whereby you basically bet against a share falling in value.
Yes.
Plenty of people make money in markets that are going down as well as up. So I think firstly, the wealthy have enough wealth to insulate themselves from the consequences of other things that are going on, and I think they still have an awful lot of mechanisms for making money and in complicated ways in complicated markets that ordinary mortals like us can't really understand.
Yes, I really wouldn't get me started on stock markets because I'm a very basic, old-fashioned person. I am my grandfather's grandson. I don't understand it. I think it's gambling, whichever way you look at it, and I don't understand why a world, this is not a game, this is the world, we should be messing around. And I remember in Richard Branson's first book, he said that his father once said to him that if you bought a jam factory and it was worth £100 and it made 10 pots of jam in a day, at the end of the day it was worth £100 plus whatever you can make on 10 pots of jam. Nothing more, nothing less. And I thought that was a really interesting quote, especially as it's gone on to be Richard Branson, who's played the market beautifully, but he still has a very valid point. People just investing in confidence and then making money when somebody says something about the company that lowers people's confidence. It's playing games with working people's money.
I would certainly agree that the distance between what shares are intended to be, which is a way of a company borrowing money to finance its investment and turning them effectively into tradable commodities to make short-term profits, has got way too wide, that gap.
Yes. Okay, let's see if we can put you on the spot here. I hate the fact that I feel this way, I really do. But I don't trust politics or politicians anymore. I never thought I'd become this cynical, I really didn't. But the more I see, the more I realise it's a game. They're playing a game. It's just a game to be won. It's nothing to do with the people, I don't think. If I asked you to design a new way of government, would you make a major restructure, or do you think what we've got is okay but it needs tweaking? Where would you start?
I'd have some principles, but the first thing I'd say is I think probably it was Cicero talking about the Roman Empire who was the first to say some of those things about politicians. I think there's always been a healthy amount of distrust of politicians, and I think that's probably always a good thing and will always be with us. That said, I think the distrust has got a bit too wide in recent times, and I'd point to two things that we would need to look at to try and make things better there. One is, who are the politicians and what are their backgrounds? And I think if you look across the world, there are far too many people that are basically coming out of the same mould. Politics has become a career rather than something that you move into when you've had some experience elsewhere, and I think we really need to be looking at how to draw in a wider set of people who haven't only gone through the same schools, the same think tanks, the same media outlets and ended up doing the same sort of job. I think we really need to look at how we attract a wider set of people in.
Yes.
The second thing, and I think this is a particular issue in the UK but it applies elsewhere too, is the amount of centralisation. I think if you can push decision-making down to a more local level, it becomes more real for people and they'll get more engaged and involved. Allied to that really is things like trying to get people engaged in the issues that really matter to them. Politics, to an extent, becomes so abstract that people don't think they can make a difference. If you can get them interested and motivated by something that is really, really exercising them, they have really strong feelings about it, then you can get some politics out on the streets. And I think that's a good way of getting the people's voice heard. You had the Occupy movement started in Spain. I don't know whether you're aware of the sort of things that were going on in London, but certainly the Occupy movement at St Paul's did a much better job of calling attention to the core issues and getting people to take it seriously than any number of politicians standing up, because they just end up in the same old Punch and Judy, scoring points off each other.
Well, can I just jump in there? Can I just jump in there for a second, John? And I'll tell you that we did a whole night on Occupy on one of my shows about 2 months ago, just 3 months ago, not long after the St Paul's thing had died down. Now, I've got to tell you, it created a lot of fuss, a lot of calls, a lot of emails, and some actual letters arrived here for me saying that they didn't have a manifesto. They didn't know what they wanted. When I interviewed them, I interviewed 5 people. 1 from Wall Street and 4 from London. When I interviewed them, they all said the same thing. They're very, very organised, by the way, and they're very intelligent people. They're not all just a bunch of, dreadlocked wasters. There's some very intelligent people in there. And they said, we know we don't have the answers. We're not economists. We're not politicians. We just know we need to talk. And we're saying to the people who do know how to do this, please sit down and talk. It's going wrong. The argument, I suppose, what I'm trying to put to you is that people kept saying to me, that's not enough, Kenny, they've got to do more. What do you think about that? You've just said that they were instrumental in bringing it to light.
I think they are instrumental in bringing it to light, and I don't think it's reasonable to expect them to have a fully worked out manifesto. But I think their point that says, actually, we've got to start talking about these things in a more mature way, identify what the real problems are, identify what some of the real solutions might be, and let's get people involved in this is absolutely central. I would be absolutely behind them. By the way, not everybody with dreadlocks is a waster. There's plenty of very serious dreadlocks.
Oh God, I shouldn't have. You know what? You're absolutely right, and I shouldn't have thrown that in. I was being very flippant, and I apologise to anybody with dreadlocks about that. I was only thinking of Swampy down his. Do you remember when he saving the trees or whatever? I shouldn't have done that. Yeah,
one of the best stories about the camp was the undercover policeman who went to sleep in one of their tents. Did you hear about that?
No, I like it though already.
He engaged in a very interesting conversation with them when he woke up in the morning and came away much enlightened, I'm sure.
Wow. Now,
the serious point about something like Occupy, though, is it's all too easy to say that that's just protest. It's not really leading anything forward. But actually, an awful lot of political progress has come from protest, of people getting out on the streets and saying, we are not having this anymore, you need to do something, you need to listen to what we want and come up with answers. If we're paying your salaries as politicians, you need to listen to what we want and come up with answers that are going to satisfy us.
Yes, my concern is that as soon as people do that, and we brought up at that time, by the way, we brought up, for example, the ANC, Nelson Mandela and people like that, somebody somewhere, somebody radical or somebody high up says, OK, that's enough, we don't want this anymore now. They do something to stop it. Giles Fraser, who was the canon at St Paul's, who ended up resigning because of that, he came out and said they have a right to protest. You shouldn't be trying to turn them away. But at the end of the day, money talks, and they were able to just either sit it out or get the police to remove them or take out a court injunction. And all that happens is something like the ANC, for example, who started off as peaceful, end up becoming violent or taking it, being radical, because they can't get listened to until they do. That's the worry, isn't it?
Well, it's certainly a worry if the only way to get your voice heard is to cause trouble. But unfortunately, that is one of the only ways to do it sometimes.
It's kind of scary because it's sort of it's giving people the message, well, we'll push you, but you won't get anywhere, and eventually you will have to be like this. So some people might think, well, we might as well start off like that in the first place.
Ultimately, though, that sort of radical change only comes when there's a mass societal change of view. I mean, if you look at what happened in Northern Ireland, then you would never support the IRA's approach, and it was actually only when they decided that fighting was going to get them nowhere and they had to engage in the political process that things really began to move forward.
Yes, I think that they do actually lose credibility as soon as they do that. You're absolutely right. One last very frivolous question, and I don't know if you've ever done this. You ever sat around the table and played a game of Monopoly with your family? If you've ever done that, it always reminds me of how the situation is right now, because eventually somebody ends up with all the money and everybody else just sort of either falls asleep or goes off to the garden or watch the television. It just feels to me as though that's where we get now, and I'm just wondering if we could just stop. Could we stop everything and just reissue all the money out again and start again and realise we've made a big mistake?
Perhaps we should, but I'd probably combine that with giving the go-to-jail card to the winner and sending them off to jail.
Yes, I think we need quite a few go-to-jail cards. That's the only problem. John, absolute pleasure to talk to you. Thank you ever so much. Tell me a little bit, very quickly, we know the website. It's www.curvedthinking.com.
That's correct.
Is that all anybody needs, really, to come find you?
Yep, they can reach us there, or they can also look on ESF-Works.com, which is a great source of information about many of the sort of things we've been talking about, particularly the practical solutions.
ESF-Works.com.
That's right.
Perfect. Thank you ever so much, John. Have a great evening, and thanks for chatting to us tonight.
You're most welcome. Talk to you again.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.